Hello, this is Jason from Liberate Raleigh, and this is another Liberate Raleigh video. This is the 8th video in the immigration series that I've been working on, and the topic of this video is titled Altering the Free Market. So what I'm going to be discussing is the general idea that immigration into the country moves the economy away from the free market, or distorts the free market, or something along those lines. This is something that I believe Christopher Cantwell has said. I've also seen Lew Rockwell write articles where he makes comments about mass immigration being a distortion of property rights, or an assault on property rights, I believe is how he put it in one of his articles. But it seems like the general idea behind these things is the principle that immigration is moving the country away from the free market. Now, what Lew Rockwell is talking about, and in a sense, it's accurate to say that immigration is moving the country away from the free market, because what he's mostly talking about is government programs that promote or actually implement immigration of people into the country. But I've covered that in a previous video, and the problem again is these are arguments against against those particular programs. And it's not the fact that these programs are immigration programs, it's just they're government programs, and the solution is to end these programs. So you can't use them as arguments against immigration. They're just bad programs and they should be ended. And yes, it's actually accurate to say that government programs do alter the free market in a negative manner, but it's the fact that they are government programs that alter the economy and alter the free market in a negative manner. It's not necessarily the fact that they are engaging in immigration that's causing the problems. It's just the fact that the government is utilizing aggressive force, or the threat of aggressive force, to get people to prevent voluntary actions. So you can't conclude from the presence of these programs that immigration is an issue with altering the free market or moving us away from a free market situation. It's actually the government programs themselves that are doing this. But I'm going to look at I'm going to examine another way of looking at this, and that, so given that we know that the government is altering the free market with these programs and other rules and regulations that may affect the economy, and obviously they would move us away from the free market principle, from the free market ideal that we wish to achieve, the implementation of property rights and self-ownership and voluntary interaction. So we know that these things have moved us away from the free market, and naturally these things would have an effect on the number of people that immigrate into the country. So what I'm going to sort of look at in general is the idea that through further government action, can the government restrict immigration, and therefore, because of this, move the economy closer to the free market? And my conclusion is that no, this cannot happen. Further government action does not move us towards the free market, it moves us away from the free market. So one of the ways to look at this is to examine the fact that to keep in mind the fact that there are millions, probably easily tens of millions, if not over 100 million people within the United States. And again, I'm simply using the United States as an example because I live in the United States. So there are many people. Obviously, there's no way to know for sure what the exact number is, but the bottom line is there is a sizable proportion of the country that wishes to do business or to voluntarily interact with people from other countries and to offer them services or offer them housing or offer them jobs, all the things that a domestically located citizen would be able to engage in with these people, with fellow domestically located citizens. All of the things that, say, I myself as a citizen can do within the country through voluntary interaction with other people. There are many, a very significant proportion of people at a minimum within the country that would voluntarily engage with all of the actions, all of the exchanges, all of the voluntary interactions that I have with other people. They would like to have all of those interactions with people from other countries, up to and including having them move into the United States, all through voluntary action. So what does this tell us? Well, what it tells us, and again, it's important to keep in mind that economics in the free market is the science of human action, as is the title of the famous book by Ludwig von Mises. We know what this is telling us is that through voluntary human action, people have a revealed preference to interact with people from other countries. So given that they would voluntarily choose to interact with these people through business or personally in any manner, then we know that interaction between domestic citizens and foreign citizens, again, up to and including the people from other countries moving into this country to voluntarily interact with other folks, is, we know this is revealed preference that immigration into the country by many people from outside the country into the country is part of the free market solution. That is revealed preference that in a free market this would happen. So you can't just arbitrarily use the government to restrict this and then, you know, wave your hands around and say, well, we know that these other programs are altering the free market, and these are immigration programs that are altering the free market. Therefore, hey, if we just restrict immigration or reduce the amount of immigration into the country or select certain countries that we don't want immigration from and use the government to do this, it doesn't follow that that gets us closer to the free market. Quite the contrary, by restricting voluntary interactions with people, you move away from the free market. So the conclusion here, and the principle that I really want to drive home, is that you move towards the free market by removing government restrictions on voluntary interaction among people. And the government's solution here of restricting immigration simply adds more restrictions. It prevents, again, these voluntary interactions that we know would occur through revealed preference between people and within the country and outside the country. And the interactions which would voluntarily occur that would allow these people to move into the country and live here shows us that this immigration is a part of the free market. So, and by preventing these interactions, we have moved away from the free market. So we can't use this as a way to argue against immigration. But there are other things that I want to cover, and I will get to right now. There are other ways of looking at this, and I'm going to examine them. In this video. So another way of looking at this and examining the situation is looking at the number of people that would, let's say we actually had a fully free market in the United States, and there was no intervention from the government at all affecting anything, then the amount of immigration into the country could reasonably be said to be the free market solution for the amount of immigration. Now the problem is there's no way of knowing what this number is. How many people immigrating into the country is the actual free market solution? So right off the bat, we can't make that determination. We don't have that knowledge, and neither does the government. But let's say for the sake of argument that this number is known, and I'm simply going to pull a number, just a random number. I'm going to say 1 million. So under a free market solution, let's say for the sake of argument that 1 million people would immigrate into the country over the course of a year, and that's the free market aggregate number of people. Now, would say if we currently had 2 million people immigrating into the country, would reducing that number to 1 million, passing laws that said, nope, we're capping it. We're capping it at 1 million people, and that's it. Would this mean that we have moved closer to the free market? Well, no, because it's not just the number of people that enter into the country, the aggregate number that enter into the country, that is the free market solution. There's a whole host of different different areas where the free market solution is being implemented. So let's say under the free market, 1 million people would enter the country, and we currently have 2 million. Well, the other problem, the other thing to look at is what is the distribution of those 1 million people across the country? What actual actions, what part of the productive process are all of these people engaging in? And who are they working for? What are they doing? Who are they interacting with? So all of that is part of the free market solution. So even if we were to reduce the number from 2 million to 1 million, does that get us closer to the free market? No, it doesn't, because we don't know, and therefore the government cannot implement exactly where in the productive process all these people are involved. So we just have to we are just kind of waving our hands around in the dark, kind of saying, well, we're only going to let 1 million people in, and wherever they go, I guess that's the best place for them. No, that doesn't follow. You've actually not moved towards the free market solution, because in order to reduce that number to 1 million from 2 million, you have to necessarily prevent voluntary interactions from occurring. You have to use force to prevent all these interactions from occurring. So on top of the fact that, one, you have not implemented the free market solution, because the 1 million people that would immigrate into the country in a free market versus the restricted 1 million people are going to engage in completely different endeavors and be involved in a whole host of different productive areas. So you don't get the same solution. You've used force to implement a different solution, and just because one arbitrary aspect of it is identical to the free market solution does not follow that you've actually implemented the free market solution. So moving from 2 million to 1 million people, although superficially it may look like, yeah, we've implemented the free market solution, no, you've not implemented it, and on top of it, you've engaged in a bunch of other aggressive actions by the government which prevent voluntary actions by people within the economy that would wish to engage with these people and do business with them and interact with them in various other ways. Now, maybe you're looking at this and saying, well, you know, it's just as good. It's close enough. Well, the problem is you can't make that determination from, say, a general welfare argument. And I've mentioned this in other videos, so I'm not going to go into in-depth with it here, but you're using the force of the government to restrict immigration down to 1 million people, and because that is a forced solution and there is a lot of aggressive actions being taken by the government to get that number down, the welfare you're not getting a welfare gain from this as you would from the 1 million people that are engaging through voluntary actions to be within the country and interact with people within the country under the free market solution. So they are not in any way, shape, or form equivalent or analogous in any way. They are, one is the free market solution, the other is a bastard version of the free market, and are in no way analogous through any sort of welfare analysis or through, obviously, any sort of reduction in government power to actually an increase in government power. So you can't use something like that, like the total number of immigrants entering the country under different conditions, and also the aggression by the government to prevent that extra 1 million people from entering the country, like I said, prevents voluntary actions which would allow the free market to move towards a free market solution given the constraints that the government has placed on it. So you continuously lose the more government action and that you utilize, and the more government power you allow it to have, the more power you allow the government to have. Another way to look at this is to use the analogy of a good that's imported into the country. So let's say under the free market, 1 million units of this good would be imported into the country. But due to government programs or government actions, currently 2 million units of this good are imported into the country. So would the proper solution be to have the government restrict importation of this good into the country from 2 million to 1 million? I feel fairly confident that most libertarians would look at this and say, no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you do that? That's simply another government law and another government interference into the economy, at least even despite the fact that all of these programs which should be ended and are in effect, at least allow people the freedom to purchase as many of these goods as they wish. And if that's 2 million, then so be it. Let it be 2 million. The solution would not be to prevent people from purchasing that extra million. And this seems fairly clear when you look at it from the aspect of a good that's imported into the country. At least I think that it should be fairly clear that you're simply adding another restriction by the government on top of these regulations and government programs. So here again, I hope that, at least my goal here is that this example will make things more understandable as to why this trying to manipulate the number of people entering the country is kind of silly, and it just ultimately just leads to further movement away from the free market. There is yet another way of looking at this, and another bit of analysis that can be applied here with respect to restricting immigration on the grounds that you're attempting to move the economy closer to the free market or engage in a better approximation of what the free market would be on those, and that being your reasoning. And that is by restricting immigration and restricting it further, you bring about what happens is immigration moves from being a voluntary process to one that is determined in many ways through public choice analysis and public choice actions by the government. So what public choice would look at is what is the economic incentive of people within the government and factions within outside of the government that seek to influence the government to implement policies for their benefit. So when you restrict immigration, and currently in the United States, immigration is controlled and restricted by the government. So what that means is that immigration is not implemented via voluntary interaction. It is implemented and executed by through public choice analysis. So what happens is immigration is restricted, and in order to get into the country, you have to jump through a bunch of legal rules and regulations to attain a work visa or to attain a green card or citizenship. So the process by which a person can enter the country is controlled by the government and is controlled and changed through the political process, which opens it up to political manipulation by factions within the government that would seek to restrict or manipulate in other ways the movement of people into the country. So I'm going to bring up an example of this and show what this does is this moves us away from a free market solution. And the more restricted that immigration is, the more power the government has over it, the worse these public choice outcomes are. So I'm going to use an example, and this is going to look at work visas. So when somebody wants to enter the country and work, what they need is a non-immigrant work visa. So this could be an L visa, or this could be an H visa, or an O visa. Commonly it's an H visa. Also commonly it's an L visa. So what this means is that in order to work in the country, somebody has to, a company has to jump through a bunch of legal hoops, pay some fees, and these fees can be substantial. For example, and I'm going off the top of my head, so I may not get the exact numbers, but to get an H-1B visa holder into the country, the fees are over $1,000 and could be over $2,000. And again, you have to, there's waiting involved for adjudication, so there's obviously time cost. So what does this mean, though, as far as public choice and political factions and so on and so forth? How does this relate to what we're talking about and the implementation of the free market? How is that affected by this sort of immigration? So what this means and how this actually works is that the government restricts immigration and creates these barriers to the labor market outside of the country. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but it actually is a pretty big deal, because companies that have the resources and the means to jump through these legal hurdles and have the funds to pay off to absorb these costs and fees have a competitive advantage against companies that don't have these resources. And typically, in general, it's the larger the company, the more resources they have to deal with this. So a large company has the ability to access a larger labor pool than a smaller company. And the large companies also have the resources to petition the government to change policies. And this is also, again, part of the public choice process that occurs. The large companies and large organized institutions that represent various political factions, the ones that can reach the requisite size to overcome the hurdle of petitioning the government and actually influence it, will influence the government to manipulate these laws to their benefit. And in fact, the simple restriction of the movement of people into the country is a benefit to these companies. So they don't necessarily want free immigration because that would remove their competitive advantage. They like the fact that it's restricted because they can handle and absorb the burden and cost of bringing people into the country, which gives them an advantage against their competitors, particularly small competitors that may try to engage in entrepreneurship to innovate and compete with these large companies. They are unable to tap as wide a labor pool. So here we see that restricting immigration is a movement away from the free market. So if you further restrict immigration, what you've done is given the government a greater amount of latitude with determining the movement of people into the country and what they can do when they're here, which opens them up to further public choice problems based on the fact that you have a lot of large corporations that would utilize this to restrict immigration and to create hurdles and barriers to entry for smaller competitors who may compete. And this is a good bargain for them because, you know, the loss of competition is easily worth the cost of the regulations to them. It allows them to be more secure in their position and have more stable profits. So here we, due to the public choice problems with having the government manage and control immigration, the more control they have, the further away from the free market solution we have, and the more we are beholden to the influence of large corporations and other large political factions and institutions that carry influence within the government. We are prevented from, these organizations by and large have the incentive to have the government restrict immigration and then control immigration and create the conditions by which people can enter the country in such a manner that it is of benefit to these political factions. So restricting immigration, when looked at from the public choice aspect here, again, fails miserably and simply moves us further away from the free market solution. There is another problem with the government restricting and then further restricting immigration with respect to it. Actually, the idea that it brings us closer to the free market is that there is a principle within the Austrian School of Economics that Ludwig von Mises extrapolated, and this is accepted by many libertarians. I would be a very rare libertarian that rejects this, and that was the Mises economic calculation argument against socialism. So if you're not familiar with this, I'm not going to do an in-depth description. That would take an entire video or probably series of videos to truly do it justice. But I'm just going to give the broad outline strokes of this, and you should be able to understand. So the Mises calculation argument is that in order to make economic decisions in a division of labor economy, you need pricing information, and in order to make comparisons between economic actions. So you have, if you're an economic actor and you're trying to decide what you want to do, within the free market system, you have pricing information which you can use, and use that to calculate whether you will end up with, whether you're likely to end up with a profit or a loss. And this profit-loss signal is the way that economic decisions are made in the free market. Now, when you are engaging in economic decision making outside of the free market, you don't have access to pricing information. This is the problem with socialism that Ludwig von Mises discussed, because they have they don't have markets. They don't have, because they lack markets, they lack market prices. Therefore, the decisions are made devoid of market prices. And because of that, there is no rational way of making these decisions. So that's the quick and dirty way of looking at this. And obviously there's a whole lot of more information out there. If you just go to the Ludwig von Mises Institute, you can find tons and tons of information. Von Mises wrote an essay called Economic Calculation in the Socialist Commonwealth, and I believe, off the top of my head, I believe it was 1920 he wrote this. It's an excellent essay. You can find that on the Mises Institute. He wrote a book called Socialism. So there's tons of information you can find relating to this. But what I want to concentrate here on is the application of this to the restriction of immigration. So if the government restricts immigration, then what you have is the government assuming the ability to make economic decisions with respect to the movement of people within the country. These actions are removed from the scope of voluntary movement and voluntary actions by economic actors within the free market, and moved into the political arena of the government, which again brings it under the subject to the public choice problems. But even setting those aside, even if the government wanted to make a correct decision with respect to what the free market is, and actually wanted to genuinely move immigration, the movement of people into the country towards a free market solution, they would not be able to do it, because they would be engaging in in these actions outside of market prices, and would lack the proper information to make these decisions. So what you end up with is, as Ludwig von Mises so astutely pointed out, you end up with economic chaos. These decisions cannot be made rationally, so you end up with the decisions end up being arbitrary, and they don't have any relation to, or they don't resemble the free market solution at all. And so as you increase the government control over immigration, which would occur if you want to restrict immigration, you would necessarily have to increase government control over immigration or other things within the economy. Well, not or, and other aspects of the market economy. By doing so, you bring more actions which normally would have been voluntary under the purview of the government and subject to government decision making, which again is made outside of market prices and that calculus. So even if you knew that, okay, 1 million people were supposed, under the free market, again, going back to the example I brought up earlier, 1 million people immigrating into the country is the free market solution. Again, you don't know where those people would work, who those people would be. Again, first of all, you wouldn't even know which 1 million people from outside the country and what skills they bring to the economy. You wouldn't know who they are, and you wouldn't know where they would work inside the country. You would it would just be a haphazard guess. You would just kind of be, all right, well, 1 million people. Well, we don't know the final solution, so how do we even implement it? And even if you knew And this is something that Mises and I believe Hayek, I believe this is an argument that they used against socialists that said, well, the socialists said, well, we can use all this nifty mathematics and we can determine what the free market solution should be, what the optimal solution should be for producing something, and what the optimal state of the economy should be. And I'm going off of memory, but I'm fairly sure that Mises and Hayek said, well, even if you didn't know what the final optimal solution is, you're not there now, and the mere fact that you know what the final solution should be doesn't mean that you know the optimal path to get you there. So even if the government knew all of these things with respect to the correct number of people to immigrate into the country, who those people would be, where they should work, they don't know the process by which it should be implemented. They know that we are not there right now. They know that we are not there right now, and even if they know where to end up, they don't know how to get there. And this was a very astute observation by Mises and Hayek with respect to government action and socialism in general. So all of this analysis applies to government control of immigration. So you're not implementing the free market; you're moving away from the free market, and you're creating economic chaos by giving the government more power and more control over what should be voluntary actions by people to move into the country and freely interact with the people, with these foreigners that move here. So again, this is just another line of argumentation that shows that having the government further restrict immigration moves us away from the free market. So I have one final comment to make with respect to immigration and restricting immigration and thinking that brings us closer to the free market. It's sort of, this entire line of thought seems to misunderstand what the free market solution is. So what it is, I mean, when you look at the idea that under a free market, and this is an example again, say for example, under a free market, 1 million people would enter the country and work throughout the country and do various things and interact with people in a certain manner within the country. So the important thing to understand is that this is the optimal solution given that there are no government restrictions. Now, the problem is that there is government interference within the economy in many ways, not just relating directly to immigration, but in many other ways. So we know that we are living in a hampered economy. Now, the thing is, and this is a very important point, that given the way that the government hampers people's actions, what voluntary freedom it does allow will move the economy towards the best solution given the restrictions of the government. So what I'm saying is that given that the government exists and it is engaging in all this interference in the economy and has moved us away from the free market solution, what voluntary action, what scope of voluntary action is allowed will move the immigration, will move the economy towards the best solution given the restrictions. So if under the free market under a system of free market capitalism, 1 million people would enter the country, and let's say under various interferences by the government, 2 million people enter the country. Well, what this tells us is that given the scope of voluntary action, people engaging in those voluntary actions the optimal solution would be 2 million people. That's what the voluntary, the scope of voluntary action tells us. This is what the revealed preference of people is. So given the restrictions and government interference, the best way to get the best solution is to simply hold steady with the current level of interference. What we would get is an economic solution that would, and again, the number of people going in and out of the country changes over time. So what we would get is a solution which would tend to move towards whatever the optimal solution is given the government interference. Now, you don't move closer to the optimal solution by increasing the amount of government interference. We know that the free market solution would be the best option. So the further away from that you move, the worse off you are. So by increasing the government interference, you move further away from the optimal free market solution. And by doing so, you create solutions that are less valuable or less good, in the sense that they allow less freedom to people and less freedom to engage in voluntary interactions that are mutually beneficial, and therefore it can be said to actually increase the welfare of people. So this is kind of the final point that I want to make, is that ultimately whatever voluntary freedom we have, we should keep. We shouldn't be giving up further voluntary freedom due to some misguided notion that the government can somehow create something closer to the free market or move whatever number of immigrants entering the country towards closer to a free market solution. That simply doesn't follow, and it doesn't make any sense. And under normal circumstances, I think that pretty much anybody espousing libertarian principles would reject this in any venue or any area outside of immigration. If they were talking about the car industry, I don't think that any libertarian would take seriously the argument that because the automobile industry is subject to interference by the government, therefore we need to have the government restrict the number of automobiles produced or the number of automobiles sold within the country, or in some manner increase its power over the automobile industry. And yet somehow libertarians seem to arbitrarily think that we can implement, at least implicitly believe, that we can implement a closer to free market solution by the government exercising further power with respect to immigration. So for all of the reasons that I've outlined here, public choice, the von Mises argument against socialism, it's simply, the correct solution is as much voluntary interaction as possible, which would mean opening up movement into the country to voluntary action, which again is the open borders solution, which is, the open borders policy, because that allows a greater scope of free and voluntary action by people. So again, making reference to the free market doesn't justify restrictions, and in fact justifies the opposite, the elimination of all restrictions of immigration into the country. So this is video number 8 in the immigration series. This looks like it's going to be the last one. I've enjoyed doing these videos. I hope they've been, if you've made it this far and listened to me drone on for hours, I hope you got something out of them. I don't rule out the possibility of revisiting the topic of immigration, but I think I've done enough on it for now. And I hope you got something out of them. I hope they were interesting, and I hope that you're able to use this to spread the ideas of libertarianism, private property and self-ownership, and the free market, and capitalism to other people and help them understand it better. So again, this is Jason from Liberate Raleigh. I thank you for watching this and the other 7 videos in the immigration series, and I will see you all later. Have a great day. Bye.